being the author of the underground classics to which I've referred. The question I have, John ZERZAN, in the title of one of your selections of essays, Elements of Refusal, does that refer to what I remember from Philosophy 101? Was it Jean-Paul Sartre who talked about the great refusal? Are you there?
Yeah, I think so. Hi there.
Hi.
Well, I think actually that collection spans all sorts of different topics, so it's I use it rather generally in terms of people who have opposed the prevailing structures of domination in different parts of history.
We see, you always hear in the popular media, oh, we went through that scene after the concert and it was sheer anarchy, people running and throwing things and stealing things, and it was just anarchic. And yet, I think anarchism, at least as a formal political doctrine, means far more than disorder or unrestrained violence. What does it mean when you call yourself an anarchist? Because I'm abysmally ignorant of anarchism. Maybe you could explain what it is to me.
Well, there are a lot of variants of anarchism, different emphases, but I think probably the most fundamental thing is the idea that authority isn't benign, but essentially negative. In other words, anti-authoritarian would be a synonym for anarchist. Well, there's a terribly general kind of definition, and you're right. Anarchy is always raised. It's long been raised in a totally pejorative sense. You know, bomb throwers, or Bosnia, Somalia. That's anarchy, or better yet, sheer anarchy. And that's been, it's one of those things to disparage any reasonable other use of that word.
Well, but nonetheless, you're going to exist in a medium, in a political environment where there are other people who believe in bomb throwing, who also refer to themselves occasionally as anarchists. So right. How do you deal in that political medium? How do you distinguish yourself, and what does anarchism mean to you?
Well, that's a good point. I'm not personally a pacifist, so right, I didn't mean to imply that all anarchists are violent or pacifists. Personally, I stress the analysis of the modern situation rather than the longer-running ideological pedigree going back to the 19th century. I'm personally more interested in what accounts for the sense of domination or degradation that I think is felt more and more throughout society.
Well, do you think that would be modified? Do you think that would be assuaged if there were no government at all?
Well, I do. It would take a lot of changes to get to that point, but I think the responsibility of the individual is a cornerstone of anarchism. And if people do take responsibility for their actions, you have a far more coherent system of life. And social life becomes, it's based on something more than things that are imposed largely from the outside or above, such as we have now.
Well, John, do you believe the state, in any of its manifestations, is illegitimate or oppressive, ranging from either hard right fascist states or hard left Stalinist states? Do you believe that a constitutional democracy such as we have here in the United States, do you believe the state in any of its manifestations is by definition oppressive?
Yeah, I'd subscribe to that. It's just variations of the same thing. Some are more oppressive than others, but I would reject the whole framework of state power as a foundation of social life.
Do you believe that the state is intrinsically evil?
Right, that's pretty much the same.
On what basis? Why do you feel that way? What's your evidence?
Well, the state, I think the state recedes in importance somewhat in modern anarchist theory, but when you consider what the state really consists of, or what it holds together, what it really means, and it means, I think, more than just, say, the federal government or something like that, which is what the right-wingers don't seem to understand whatsoever. Then you begin to flesh out what are the negative parts and what we've given up in order to have a state. And you can go all the way back to civilization, which was originally imposed by violence over people who didn't have any such notions of political power. They had a much more organic, face-to-face kind of framework of ordering their lives without the state. Well, in other words, the state as an irrelevancy, I would say it's more of an irrelevancy than the word evil is, kind of
Well, then what social forces led to the establishing of states? Or political forces?
That depends on how far back you want to go. The modern state comes from various centralizing tendencies, less and less local or autonomous power, and it goes in that direction of a stronger central kind of power. Again, progressively further and further away from having the locus of control with the individual or with the smallest level group, that's what I would be in favor of, is very small self-governing groups.
But nonetheless, even if something is self-governing, it's still governing, which means there has to be somebody with more authority than somebody else. Is
Not
that
necessarily? I mean, you could make strict equality the rule, and strict. It wouldn't necessarily. I mean, it has evolved into hierarchy and abuse of power, and that's not an accident.
Well, if it's not an accident, what are the forces behind it?
Well, people begin to lose their what control they have, and it's usually, I think in history it's been a long, protracted struggle. It's usually presented as a kind of a glorious development, but the other way of looking at it is that people are kind of stripped of what control they have, and then it ends up to where you have an overarching power over people.
Well, what is the difference between your vision and, say, the vision of a militiaman who also calls for the breakdown of the political structure? Because you distinguished yourself from those on the militant right.
Well, yes, extremely so. I think what we've been talking here in strictly political terms, but you have to bring in the social facts of life, and they don't seem to. They subscribe to everything apparently about this system, except for federal power, apparently, and by so doing, they make federal power into such an incredible bogey that it's not even recognizable. And by saying that, I'm not defending federal power. I just, said the opposite. But in other words, they're not looking at more of the fabric of life and all of the things that really constitute a social system, which are at least as important as purely political power. And maybe that's what leads them to these kind of psycho or paranoid fantasies that have no basis at all.
John, as a self-professed anarchist, how do you resolve not the problems, but the necessities of production and distribution in an anarchic state that you visualize, or unstate?
I would. That gets into further stuff. In other words, I'm against production. In other words, the way you're saying it, you could also phrase it as, how could you have a face-to-face kind of life when we have a system like this? Well, the point is, we shouldn't have a system like this, at least in my opinion.
All right, when we come back, I have to make a few concessions to this system, as temporary as it is.
Okay.
And after we come back from these commercials, I'll continue with John ZERZAN, anarchist, and the author of 2 collections of essays, Elements of Refusal and Future Primitive. And we'll be right back. This is Jay Diamond on WABC, and then later we'll take some calls with John ZERZAN about the anarchist movement later on through the evening. John, I asked you about the problems of production and distribution, and I was kind of nonplussed when you said that your ideal society would have no production. Could you explain that to me?
That's a tough one.
Well, all right, we've got time.
Okay.
See, I think it's a tough one because I think many people, when they hear about, it was the anarchists who blew up, I don't think most people have more of a sophisticated idea of anarchism than I do. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think it's the same as communism, but I think it's vastly different, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think communism is an authoritarian collectivist system that certainly doesn't put the individual first in terms of communist systems that have existed.
But a lot of, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of the famous anarchists, Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, I think, made their way to the Soviet Union after the revolution, thinking it would be a paradise, and only to leave in disgust and hold that Bolshevik revolution in high contempt. Isn't that the case?
Right. In fact, I think they overstayed their I think they were, of course, easy to say this looking back, but they didn't know, but they didn't know at the beginning that the Bolsheviks would take complete control of that revolution. There were certainly libertarian elements within that revolution, but of course, as we know, the Bolsheviks got complete power and put all the anarchists in prison, and quite a lot of other people too. So then they gave up on it by 1921 or so and left.
Well, if you can explain to me, when you say no production would be the ideal state, how would people get by if nothing were made? How would people work? How would people live? How would they eat? How would they function?
Well, let me first of all say that I'm not speaking for all anarchists. There are a number of anarchists that have no problems at all with modern technology and the entire industrial system. But it seems to me that part of the reason why people are so unhappy and why the natural world is being extinguished at an accelerating rate is to serve the industrial system of production. And with its increasing level of division of labor, which I think lessens the individual more and more, and thwarts and dominates the individual more and more, you have less control over anything as it develops.
What is the division of labor?
Well, the specialization would be a synonym for that.
In other words, one person is a dentist and another person is a plumber.
Right.
What would be your alternative to a world where one person is a dentist, another is a plumber, another is on the radio, and another fixes cars?
Well, given the system, you have to have those specializations. But what I'm getting at is that in earlier times, this kind of development wasn't so pronounced, and I think people were led lives of more wholeness because they weren't so divided up. Let me just give you an extreme example of this in terms of a very good book, a fairly recent book by a guy named Zygmunt Bauman. He wrote a book about the Holocaust, and his thesis was, and he's a rather well-known sociologist, he pinned the idea of the Holocaust as inseparable from the idea of industrial mass production and specialization, where people have very, very little control over anything, so that the responsibility becomes so dispersed that horrible things can happen, and you can't actually, with some exceptions, I mean, of course there were policymakers at the top,
all right,
but you look over the whole system and you say, how could you have done that? But actually very, very few people, I mean, they just did their little tiny piece.
Right, it's like somebody who works at an atomic bomb factory, and they never see the whole bomb. Their whole life is spent tightening one screw in a 3 by 3 inch by 3 inch steel panel.
Right.
And that's so they have no conception of the whole of what they're doing.
Right. Good example. Right. That's the perfect case there, I think.
So, but if let's say that tomorrow you woke up and John ZERZAN was God, how would
That's a very anarchist idea. Go ahead.
How would you well, just for the sake of this discussion,
right,
how would you reorder life on Earth, on this planet? We have a nation of two. Yeah, go ahead.
There has to be a way to reverse let's take one fairly obvious thing and yet a very monstrous thing, that the natural world is disappearing. It's being extinguished at an ever greater rate. And practically all you have to do is read the newspaper to know that. Despite the nostrums and the calming words of government leaders, it's happening. And you could, it's fairly obvious. So, and why is it happening? It's part and parcel of the whole system. So, I mean, we seem to be captive to this mega machine that's out of control. And it's not only outer nature, it's inner nature that's crumbling. I mean, another thing that you can get from reading the paper, it's nothing esoteric. Just look at the madness. The teenage suicide rates are going up. The people are shooting each other in the workplace. I mean, not all over the map.
You feel this is a function? This is a function of the psychological implications of technology?
Well, in large part, yeah. In large part, it's not accidental. I mean, something generates this kind of pathology and these terrible things that are happening.
Right, but
seemingly more common every day. The more bizarre things.
All right, but are you advocating a way of life where all technology would be eliminated?
As a matter of fact, that's about it.
Well, but
so
then
my ideas are quite unpopular. But when we are faced with such dire well, we're in a position of extremity right now, a pretty horrible situation, if you ask me. And I think what we're beginning to see is a questioning of very fundamental things that we weren't questioning before because things weren't this bad and getting worse.
But John, then in that world, you and I wouldn't be able to have this discussion across the continent.
Though that's true. That's very obviously true. We wouldn't have phones. We wouldn't have a lot of things, but we might have better conversations with our neighbors or with our, we wouldn't rely on mediated things. I mean, I'm enjoying this. I'm not saying I'm not.
Me too.
But it's wonderful. But this is kind of a consolation or a compensation for a life that's really kind of strange when you think about it.
Well, I want to come back to you, and we'll discuss the vagaries of the modern industrial life and your prescription to cure it. On WABC, I'm speaking with anarchist John ZERZAN. The phone numbers, if you want to speak to John ZERZAN, if you have any queries about anarchism, New Jersey and everywhere, 201-489-WABC, New York and all over, 212-563-WABC, Connecticut and everywhere, 203-862-WABC. I'm speaking with John ZERZAN. He is an anarchist, and if you have any questions or have ever had any questions on anarchism, now is the time. This is Jay.
I think classical anarchism or 19th century anarchism had quite a belief in the Enlightenment ideals of progress and science and technology. Not all of them believed in that. The Luddite faction, for example, certainly didn't. But I think now we're seeing far less belief in that. That's really crumbled across society. And in terms of anarchist theory, it's been questioned a great deal, and I think that's the difference.
Well, how could such classic anarchists as, let's say, Emma Goldman, Robert, and Alexander Berkman, how could they at the same time advocate technology and the way I perceive it, as you describe it, technology? I think they envision technology in service to mankind. Is that correct?
Right.
Well, how could they envision that absent any government, absent any state structure? How could this technology flourish without a state as a medium in which it could flourish?
Well, that's a good point. I think there's two things to say on that. That is a good point, and I think it has something to do with the decline of anarchism in general. But one could also say, though, and certainly quite a few anarchists do, that it isn't necessary to have a state. You could have a self-managed system where people involved in the different fields make the decisions by assemblies or something like that, where it's democratically self-managed. My problem with that, though, is that it kind of yields to the system. You end up running the system that is not, is perhaps very malignant. I think it is. So, in other words, you have the same system, but it's democratically run instead of less democratically run, and there's not perhaps a very qualitative difference.
So do you envision kind of a caveman socialization of hunter-gatherers?
Well, let me just make one point about that. Some of the thinking along the lines that I've been pursuing has been inspired by what has been a rather surprising revision of our whole take on pre-civilized life. And the stereotype is still around that it was mostly just ignorance and barbarism and violence and just a crude, totally unpleasant kind of life. Well, in the orthodox, in the field, in the literature, in anthropology, that's been overturned enormously in favor of a almost Edenic or somewhat almost like a paradise compared to those that very dark way of looking at it. There was a book, for example, if I could just mention one book that was very influential on this was called Stone Age Economics by Marshall Solons, who was, or perhaps still is, the chairman of the department at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, so he's not a fringe-type character. Anyway, his idea, which has been really accepted very widely, and although it's not even that well known now, is that Paleolithic, way back, that represented the original affluent society because all of the basic needs people had were met with very little work.
Well, so that's true, but there was
attractive now. Yeah.
Yeah, but there wasn't a nation like China that had 1,300,000,000 people.
Right.
Is it realistic to that you could attempt to, quote, order such a society without any state with 1,300,000,000 people?
Well, again, I wouldn't say it's inconceivable that you could have a self-managed system, and it might even be more stable, without a central power, without a central state. But again, how I mean, you still have the same system, though. That's my objection to some anarchist friends who, they're way into self-management, but they don't look all that much, in my opinion, at what they're self-managing.
Well,
but your question, I think, has a larger validity. If because back then in the hunter-gatherer stage of humanity, of course there were so few people compared to now, so it looks kind of insuperable. Except it's not perhaps quite so completely ludicrous. For example, I don't know if you've heard of permaculture.
no.
This is an approach to agriculture in which a huge amount of I'm not a big expert on this, but this is somewhat current these days, the approach that shows that all kinds of food and a variety of food can be grown in a very tiny area. I mean, we have now the monoculture, mass production of agriculture, which is completely destroying the soil, removing the topsoil, impoverishing the quality of the food. And so, in other words, there are some ways that you could start to see a different, in other words, you wouldn't have production, you might have very, very small, where pretty much everyone has their own small area, and apparently it could be very small.
Well, I might be an incipient anarchist because I have a lifelong aversion, psychological and physical aversion, to computers. In fact, I can't work an electric can opener. So it might be in my blood. I don't know, but I'll tell you this: you are correct in one respect. Some people's loyalty, obsession with technology goes to an extreme. I knew an individual, and this is not an exaggeration, and it's funny on the surface, but I think it points out your version of humanity's dilemma with respect to technology, how it totally overwhelms our psyche. I had a friend who, if you were on the phone with him repeating a phone number, he'd be sitting there with a pencil in his hand, but he would wheel himself 30 feet across his room to his computer to turn on the computer, put in the right disk, press a million buttons so as to take the phone number down in the computer rather than just write it down in half a second.
Right. I see.
And I would constantly say, well, wait a minute, what is the point of having that computer if it takes you 30 seconds to wheel yourself across the room, switch it on, put in the disk, type in however many, to get the computer to accept a 7-digit phone number, you had to make maybe 100 impressions on the keys, touching codes and signals and f-stops, etc., etc. I said, well, why don't you just write the damn number down? 7 lousy, and you can transfer it later.
Right.
And he had no answer. Well, this is the way I do it. And that's exactly the way he would respond. And I think this indicates the mentality that you're opposed to.
Well, let me throw out another, something that what you just said just now sparks another wacky idea, which is that perhaps, and this sounds very strange to begin with, but perhaps there aren't any labor-saving devices or machinery when you stop to think about it. In other words, you have the nice gleaming computer there, but what makes it up? I mean, when you think of all the smelting and the plastics and the toxicity and the drudgery involved and the endless network of distribution and storage and, I mean, there's a million processes, and it's not even clear whether these things, if you were able to untangle them all, is the sum total of the effort that goes into it really saving any labor at all? It's not clear that it is.
Not clear. It's absurd because there's nothing in a computer, at least any of the computers I've seen in my friends' homes or offices, that you can't put on a Rolodex.
Right.
Stay with me on WABC. We'll come back and we will go to the phones. We have people who want to talk to John ZERZAN, anarchist. That sounds ominous. You're not sitting there with a firecracker or anything, are you?
No, with an apple instead.
Okay, I can handle that. You're on WABC. Hi.
Good morning, Jay.
Hi.
My question is for the anarchist.
Mr. ZERZAN is here.
Okay.
He's listening to you.
Okay, sir. In this society which you describe, I'm just curious, what is the incentive for a person to pursue an advanced education or specialized training such as doctor or dentist, etc.?
Well, I don't think there'd be incentive for that in itself, but I think there would be incentives. There are incentives other than just the competitive money incentives. I feel like there'd
Takes
be
a lot of
of
work in many
creativity
years
freed
to
up.
receive that kind of training. Are people going to just do it out of the goodness of their hearts when they're not going to get anything back more than the next guy who may be just doing manual labor without any kind of specialized training?
But, well, that actually, what you're just saying there, Robert, kind of contains a lot of the same critique that I was trying to get across. In other words, that kind of specialization is itself a problem. I mean...
So what are we going to do, just throw up our hands and give up everything that we have to this point and join the animal kingdom?
But what do we have at this point? We have we're just about killed off nature completely. The whole fabric of society, wouldn't you agree, is kind of going nutty? I mean, look at the berserk stuff that's going on out there. I mean, it's just getting more horrible every day. I mean, what is there really? I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering how much we really have to defend. Isn't it kind of a lot of sickness that
There's a lot of sickness going on in this world, but and I'm not rich. I work very hard. I go to school full time. I work full time. I work long hours. But I'm basically happy, and I live in New York City, and I don't think it's such a bad place. And I think people maybe should appreciate a little more what they have. And yes, there's a lot of problems, but I don't know that going to a collective society or turning our backs on technology and all the developments and research and everything that we have accomplished to this point is going to be the answer.
Well, maybe not. It's an open question, and
well, basically, it sounds like you're saying let's just turn up our hands and give up and just let our existence go on as nature, wants it to go on without us having any influence on our lives.
Well, I don't know if it would be necessarily passive. I mean, I think we'd be in more control of things than we are now.
In what regard?
If things were more localized and if we had a greater control over things. Don't you have this feeling like we have control over almost nothing today?
Absolutely. And
right,
I feel that federal government should be downsized. I'm obviously Republican and conservative, but you're talking about basically just giving up everything we have, it sounds like, and just letting things carry on at their own will.
What do you study, Robert?
Me, would like to go to medical school eventually. I'm a paramedic.
Okay, thank you for the good questions. I appreciate the call.
Good night.
Thank you very much. Are there any conservative Republican anarchists, John?
I doubt it, but that's, I guess, in some ways there are some connections. Well, my dad was a right-wing Republican Goldwaterite, and we had a lot of clashes, I'll tell you. But there was some congruence. I mean, we were libertarians in our different ways. I mean, he didn't have much of a beef with the social order, though, and that's a pretty big distinction. But obviously, I'm against. This fellow Robert is against government, at least to some extent, and so am I. So there's some connection there, I guess.
But certainly, anarchism and the way you portray it, your personal anarchism, would seem to be antithetical to the left and the hard left as well.
Well, yeah. In fact, I'm not real comfortable with the label leftist because I think that's kind of not to the point. I think that, as you say, it saddles me with a bunch of stuff that is not part of my vision of things, and some of this language kind of trips us up, and that's I don't use that word.
John, why is violence often associated with anarchism? Seriously, we think about Sacco and Vanzetti, we think about the Haymarket riot, the Palmer raids, we think about the bombings in the teens and the 20s that led to the Palmer raids, and even the Unabomber. I think expresses some anarchist sentiment in the last two letters he's written to the media. Yeah. Why is that? Does that seem to be so closely associated with anarchy? You seem like a very touchy-feely, fuzzy, nice guy.
Oh, you better look out. No, but well, I think it's out of desperation. I mean, I'm not advocating what this Unabomber person or persons is carrying out, but these people apparently as targets are. I think they're guilty of major crimes, but they carry on with impunity. Nobody stops them.
You think the Unabomber's targets are guilty of crimes?
Yes, I do. I certainly wouldn't say I would be sending letter bombs through the mail or something like that, but
maybe a pie in the face. What crimes are they guilty of?
I'm not real sure of all the specifics here, but if this corporate guy who's in charge of wiping out the last of the natural forest in some state or something, that's horrific. How does he look at his kids and justify that? How does he look in the mirror? I mean, that's an enormous crime.
Well, what about the mathematicians that have been attacked? What are the crimes of a mathematician?
I don't know. I don't actually know that much about the Unabomber. I didn't know there were mathematicians.
I think computer scientists.
Oh, computers is a very negative thing. Is robbing the texture of society and texture of life to a very great degree. And I don't think that these people that probably are conscious of it at all. They're probably nice, liberal, whatever they are. I mean, they're probably real pleasant. If you were at a cocktail party, it would be just very, very nice and polite. And yet, I think a lot of the content is being drained out of our lives. A lot of the real
face-to-face
experience. Where people, like you were saying, people sit in front of their video screens. People send email 8 feet away to somebody on the other part of the office.
It is stupid.
And the whole thing it's not just a joke either. It's really in virtual reality. When reality becomes so empty, and it's partly emptied out by all this high-tech development, then we're going to just escape into virtual reality where we put on our headphones because we've destroyed real experience to such a degree that we've got to get into this electronic stuff. I mean, isn't that madness?
Hey, John, people do that already in the city anyway.
Sure.
People walk around with the headphones. People ride bikes with the headphones. People even drive cars with their headphones on, to deaden themselves, I suppose, because I wouldn't want to drive a car deprived of any of my senses, and I think it should be against the law. Of course, the hated state would have to enforce the law. But who would?
A good point. I totally agree. There's a continuum. It's not just something like VR. It doesn't come out of nowhere.
Right. That's right. People are doing this to themselves, isolating themselves with technology, somehow cutting themselves off from any real empathy with other human beings. And I think with the lack of empathy comes, mass murder, perhaps.
I agree with you. And not just empathy with other people, but which is very fundamental, but empathy with nature. There's a separation from nature. Now nature is just something for a theme park or something. It's practically gone.
Speaking of nature, are there anarchist communes where people live in face-to-face community with each other and with nature? And two, do you live on such a commune?
I think there are some. Yes, and no, I don't. I'm glad that there are, and I totally support that, but society becomes more and more totalizing and pervasive, and there's less and less any place to go. I'm not saying it's not a nice, relatively nicer option for some people. I'm sure it is, but actually there's no place to hide anymore.
Where are the anarchist communes? Do you know of them?
Yeah, there's one that I know of in, the one comes to mind right away called, I think it's called Dreamtime Village or something like that in Wisconsin. And I've seen some very interesting stuff about that. Fairly recent commune. It doesn't go way back.
What about the way the Amish people live? The Pennsylvania Dutch?
I think that's pretty admirable. Except for the religious part, I would find that oppressive. But the simplicity, I think that's appealing to a lot of people. People have a natural respect for the way they live, I think.
The abhorrence of technology. I mean, they still use horse and buggies.
Right.
But now, are you an atheist?
Right.
Is that part of the commitment to anarchism, or are there anarchists who believe in God?
That's a pretty classical. That's probably something that pretty much unites most all anarchists. Although actually, there are exceptions to that, too, I guess. I mean, for example, there's a big wing of pagan anarchists who are, I mean, they're definitely not Christians, kind of revival of native kinds of forms of spirituality, that kind of thing. They probably wouldn't say they're atheists, or I know some of them wouldn't anyway, and yet a lot of those folks consider themselves anarchists.
Are you an empiricist totally? I'm
not sure what you mean.
Well, I mean, do you recognize anything other than the natural world? Or, in other words, you're not a pagan. So do you have any sense of the supernatural? Do you have any sense of the supranatural? Do you have any sense of the spiritual? Or are you strictly an empiricist? You only know what you observe?
Yes. No, I have a sense of the spiritual, but I think it's a kind of demystified sense. In other words, it's not transcendent. I think the spiritual part of us exists more fully when we're in touch with nature, as it used to be. I think there was a kind of prevailing spirituality before gods and religions were invented. I think the latter things bespeak beginnings of alienation.
All right.
That's kind of hard to put in just a few words there, but I think there's no necessary contradiction between feeling a spiritual sense and being an atheist.
All right. Stay with me here on WABC, John ZERZAN, and we'll get back to this introspection on anarchism with anarchist John ZERZAN. Questions for John ZERZAN. Tom. Hello, Tom. Hi.
Hi, Jay. Tom, John had pointed out earlier that many of the militia groups we've heard about are almost exclusively concerned with the federal government, and yet they seem to feel fairly content with local government. However, I know in my community, I think most people I know feel the greatest threat from local government, primarily coming in the form of local property taxes, which in rural areas of New York have each year rising 20, 30, 40, 50%. And as a result, I'm finding that people are developing a lot of anarchistic values in my town. I think the property tax is perhaps even a prime example of government terrorism, where they say, pay us this money or we'll take your home and shelter from you. And we don't care if you have any income. We don't care how many people there are in your family. If you're a single person, in fact, single people are being made to pay twice, in fact, what couples are paying for their homes in terms of property taxes. And I think it's another situation where even on a local level, people feel they have no input into local government, that a system has been designed and is almost free-running, that they have no ability to change whatsoever.
Well, John, is that how you view yourself, as a tax protester? Kind of like Howard Jarvis in California in 1970?
Tom makes an articulate point. I don't know anything about the local situation there, but certainly people are frustrated with that, among other things. That's,
well, Tom,
connected with what we were
Tom,
saying.
let me ask you a question.
Sure.
The taxes are onerous where you are in Poughkeepsie?
Yeah, I have one of my neighbors owns a home in Brooklyn as well as up here.
Right.
And his house down in Brooklyn is valued maybe as twice as much as his home up here, and yet his taxes up here are twice as much as they are in Brooklyn.
Well, but historically, New York City is famed for its very low rate of residential taxation. Mm-hmm. So you might be more accurate, let's say, in comparing the real estate tax in Poughkeepsie to the real estate tax in Nassau or Suffolk County, and I think you'll see that you do better than Nassau or Suffolk.
Well,
you're comparing your real estate taxes to the one locality where it is known that historically the taxes are disproportionately low. You might feel better about the taxes you pay if you compared it to, as I say, Nassau, Suffolk, or even Rockland. Then you might feel that you're getting a big bargain. But have you ever asked the local authorities to explain to you just why they need to tax why they purport to need to tax your property to such a degree? In other words, have you received an accounting of where the money goes?
Oh, well, for instance, in our school district last year, we had a 40% increase in our school taxes. We required special legislation because the school board had somehow overspent $2.5 million that they didn't account for in the last couple of years. We had a police chief who was working under a fictitious name for the school board. All kinds of things going on, and this is just kind of business as usual.
Well, maybe, I'm sorry to interrupt you, maybe John ZERZAN could run for mayor of Poughkeepsie on the anarchist ticket.
Oh, was just actually, I'm talking across the river in Ulster County.
Oh, well, Ulster. John, are you interested?
I'm not too much of a politician, but it sounds like quite a rip-off going on there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess anarchists don't much get involved in politics, do they, John?
No. The whole voting question comes up. I think that's. I don't think it's very consistent to vote, for example, because I think that just reproduces and legitimates the system, but it always tries to pull us in. It always offers these issues and these problems, but I think it keeps the whole thing rolling. And I think when one looks at the whole thing, you find yourself playing this game that just keeps it going.
All right, we'll get back here with Paul on WABC. Hello, Paul. You're talking to John ZERZAN, our guest. Are you there, Paul?
Oh, this is Mike.
Mike? All right, Mike. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. I just wanted to say that I myself am an anarchist. My anarchy views are just slightly different. I would like man to get back more to the primitive stage where he depends on himself, where he hunts for his own food, so to speak, takes care of his own property, it protects his area, and it relies on himself, does not rely on other forces to help him.
Well, what if in hunting for his own food he decides that he prefers to eat other people? Who's going to stop him, absent a state?
Well, cannibalism, that happens anyway.
So that's okay with you?
Well, no, I'm not saying cannibalism is okay, but I mean, look at Jeffrey Dahmer.
That's not. I don't know. Maybe I could have better luck speaking. I think I make sense when I talk, and yet sometimes I speak to people and they don't have a clue. John, was my question? Did you understand my question or the point I was trying to make?
Well, right, but
why doesn't Mike, my esteemed...
Yet I have, maybe all three of us are on a different planet here, but anyway, what occurred to me from that, and probably this is not what you were intending there, but, raising the necessity of the state again in that context, it's interesting that things like cannibalism and human sacrifice and all that sort of stuff, it didn't exist before agriculture. It comes with domestication.
Cannibalism?
Primitivism has to be...
All right, well, let's talk about it in the abstract then. Who would determine, absent a political authoritarian structure of some kind, to modify a human behavior? Who would modify human behavior? Or would it be completely unmodified and can anybody do whatever they want?
Yeah, it's a question, I think, of whether it needs to be modified. Certainly it needs to be modified in the modern context. It always has to be constrained in various ways because it's deformed by an unnatural situation. But when I was referring to a while back the revision of pre-civilization, there was no organized violence. So there was no organized violence to sort out.
Well, how do you know? You weren't there.
Well, that's what orthodox anthropology says, not just just anarchist ravings.
All right, but we would be forced to impose anarchism on a human species that has already been corrupted.
Right.
That is not in its initial pristine state, having already been corrupted by industrialization and technology and agriculture and everything else. So we might come to a point where when we get back to these face-to-face small groupings, absent the division of labor, unencumbered by the division of labor, where one man would see a guy with a nice woman, and he'd take a rock and hit the other guy over the head and take the woman. Who would modify his disposition to do that?
Well, again, you're assuming that would happen. I mean, But
my rationale for it happening and being inevitable is that these people are now corrupted by the intrusions of technology and industrialization.
But you were positing the return to that state, and if they enacted that return, it seems to me, at least, I mean, of course, this too is rather undecidable at the moment, but that would be what reconstitutes that primal state. In other words,
I see.
Okay.
You don't think this is slightly quixotic?
Well, it sounds that way, but then 20, 30 years ago, we had an altogether different view of pre-civilized life, and now, like I said, it sounds real flowery and flower power or something like that, but actually, this is kind of the standard view now.
Okay.
Oh, Jay?
Yes, Mike?
Can I say one more thing? Or?
Quickly.
Okay. I just wanted to say, point this out. When do you think that the revolution will happen?
I hope it happens pretty soon. I mean, things are getting pretty bad, don't you think?
Oh, sure. I mean, you have hunting packs of people roaming around littered streets, passing burnt-out storefronts, attacking people. You have kids wearing their pants backwards, shooting each other. You have all this nonsense of diseases and pollution. Things are out of control. Exactly. I mean, we have to resort back to the non-government form because governments are the fault of all world problems, such as free flow of oil at market prices. You have trading wars.
See you down at Union Square Park, Mike. See you down at the Missing Foundation Convention. Thank you very much. All right, on WABC, I'm talking to John ZERZAN, anarchist, and say hello to Shelley. Hello, Shelley. Hi.
Yes, hi. I differ with your guest on many points. I resent the anarchist desire to impose their vision or version of what they think pre-literate or, in his words, pre-civilized, although I reject that term, societies might have been. I don't think that there's evidence in the anthropological record for what he's saying. But even if there is, I resent his desire to draw the line at where he differentiates tools from technology. It seems to me that tool making is an inherent trait of humankind since we have participated in societal gatherings, and that's what differentiates us from the animals. And I'd like to know where exactly he draws the line. Apparently he uses the printing press because he publishes books. He uses the radio and the telephone. I'd like to know if he uses modern medicine. I'd like to know where exactly the line will be drawn on what is acceptable technology and what is not.
Well, I don't. I do use those things. I don't come from another planet. I mean,
so where do you get to draw the line, and why do you get to decide?
It isn't my decision to have things this way, but neither should I. I mean, if things are this way, I mean, I have to live too. You know, I mean, I have to survive. I live under the same contradictions as anyone else.
So when you go back to your societies that you want this very egalitarian society to exist, what technology is allowable and what isn't? I'm interested.
Well, it's not a question of allowable or imposing things. I would like to remove all impositions because, you know, contrary to what you may think, there really is quite a lot of evidence, and a lot of it from some remarkable...
Not for egalitarian societies, there isn't.
Well, I think so. I think
without interest groups and power groups?
Complete consensus about pre-civilized life in terms of egalitarian. That's one thing that's absolutely indisputable. That band society or hunter-gatherer was egalitarian. You won't find any anthropologist that disputes that. And there's a lot of other things too, including a greater gender equality than with agriculture. And when agriculture came, that's when women became beasts of burden. Well,
so
I could go on and on and on.
Do you take agriculture then? Would you eliminate agriculture from society then?
Well,
is that where you draw the line?
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to your question. I'm sorry. In terms of, you were talking about tools and where one draws the line. That's a really intriguing question. I grant you there were, in fact, I think there were some just stunningly beautiful tools about 1 million years ago, back in the Acheulean.
I want to know where you draw the line. You would eliminate agriculture. What tools would you have in your society?
Well, I think, to me, the fundamental thing, I'm just giving you my hypothetical stuff. It's not etched in stone, pardon the pun.
Well, hypothetical is the operative word.
Right. Well, I think division of labor is the key thing. I think when you start having more and more division of labor, you have less and less wholeness and less connection to nature and less connection with the other people.
I understand that, but if you eliminate agriculture, what tools would you allow in your society? Would you have medicine? Would you what are you envisioning?
Let me answer that. First of all, there was virtually no disease before agriculture. There was no degenerative disease, no infectious disease, no mental disease. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that's very standard, well-known information. Now, hunter-gatherer life was primarily gathering. Very modern methods of examining the edges microscopically of stone tools finds almost no animal flesh. And the amount of animal flesh actually could have been from scavenging more than from hunting. So it was a question of gathering, and it required very little work. That too has been established pretty much beyond a doubt.
All right, Shelley, we've had this railroad ride to the last stop. I appreciate your call. Thank you very much. Well,
Intelligent questions, I thought.
Shelley is in a petulant mood tonight. Maybe she needs the invention of Benoit balls.
But it has a lot of implications, though. I mean, these things get political right away because they bear a lot of implications.
Love the way people just slammed down. Tell me, in prehistoric times, when people were mildly frustrated, did they slam the phone down on other people as a gesture of their defiance?
I don't know, probably not.
I think so. Stay with me, John Zerzan, on WABC.
You've heard all about it. You've read all about it. I'm talking Internet here, the global information superhighway that puts the entire world in your hands. Internet is news, statistics, email, entertainment, science, sex, art, libraries, games, people. There are no limits. IDT will put you on the information superhighway for a flat, no gimmicks, $15 per month. No charge like the others per minute, per hour. Just $15 a month. And with IDT, it's never a long-distance call. To access that Internet, always a local call, and you get all Internet services. Get that naughty smile off your face. You heard me. I said all Internet services, 8,000 areas of interest. IDT's expert counselors will guide you free every step of the way. So put the whole Internet world in your hands by calling IDT now, 1-800-245-8000, and take the Internet highway as far as it goes. Call 1-800-245-8000. That's 1-800-245-8000. 8,000.
The future. Will you have enough money to enjoy it? Having financial security depends on how well you prepare for it. The earlier you begin and the more wisely you invest your money, the more rewarding your future will be. Now you can get a head start on turning your dreams into reality with the Wall Street Journal's Guide to Planning Your Financial Future. This comprehensive, easy-to-read 180-page guide answers complex questions like which investments are safest or the most profitable over the long haul? What is a defined contribution plan? A living will? A reverse mortgage? What does intestate mean, and why do you need to know? The guide retails for $14.95, but it's yours free with your paid subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Get 10 weeks of the Journal for the business, financial, and economic news you need every business day, and the valuable guide to help you achieve a more secure future, all for only $38.
Call toll-free in the continental U.S., 800-228-2288. That's 800-228-2288 for the Wall Street Journal. Former Mayor Ed Koch.
Well, I don't know. When you saw the militia people being interviewed on Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, it was scary. I mean, what these people were saying was paranoid. The government might very well have planted that bomb so as to cast blame. This is crazy stuff.
Ed Koch, weekday mornings at 11 on WABC.
WABC. Jay Diamond.
Yes, you still have time to show Mom how much you love her by sending a Matilda teddy bear this Mother's Day, custom-made just for her. Now, just think of the possibilities. You can have the bear dressed in your mom's favorite pastime, favorite color, or send your special mom an angel or princess bear. You can even have her name right on the outfit, making it truly one of a kind. And it's so easy to do. Just call 1-800-29-TEDDY, and a professional designer will help you create the perfect bear. It's also the ideal gift for birthdays, get well, first communions, anniversaries, weddings, newborns, and of course graduations. So send your favorite graduate a graduation bear dressed in cap and gown with school colors and holding a diploma with the newest graduate's name and school. Call the Matilda Bear Company today and your custom teddy bear will be on its way, carrying a basket of candies and a greeting card with a message just from you. Call 1-800-29-TEDDY, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and send a bear that you help create. Call 1-800-29-TEDDY. Again, that's 1-800-29-TEDDY. I continue with John Zerzan, and I think an energetic and interesting discussion about, well, anarchism. John, here is some questions suggested by a listener. If two of the small social groups have need of the same resource, what authority will prevent a fight if there's no greater authority, church or state, to impose rules of behavior between groups? Are you there?
Yes. Well, it's a good question. Originally, there didn't seem to be much need of that, but there was a lot more room and fewer people. Need of the same resource, that's a little abstract. I mean, I'm trying to visualize that. I'm trying to, that seems to impute the problem in there to begin with. I'm not, again, I don't know why there would have to be a solution imposed from above.
All right. Let's say do you visualize a family unit, a man mating with a woman in in a monogamous relationship?
I don't know. That I don't know how much, whether it was strictly monogamous or I think that goes back a long way.
Well, you better figure it out. The revolution could come tomorrow. You want to be ready. All right, let's take some calls, John. Paul's calling from Port Jefferson. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Jay. Thank you very much for bringing us a rare philosophical discussion. I've never heard this on the electronic media before, and I think it's worthwhile. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And for John, I'd like to pose a question, two-part question, if I may, Jay, which requires just a brief introduction. John, when we look at nature, when we look at the Earth, when we look at the physics, the Big Bang Theory, we start from an explosion. We start from a simple, and we move gradually to more and more diverse and complex forms.
Quickly now, quickly.
We follow nature. We see the same thing, higher and higher degrees of specialization.
Get to the point. I don't have too much time.
Okay, well, if you go to an anthill, you examine, you see that the ants in compact area require high degrees of specialization, as do humans, and more dense populations of humans require higher degrees of specialization. Isn't it inevitable that we move in this direction as we pass through the various stages that Alvin and Heidi Toffler talk about, from the pre-agricultural to the agricultural?
All right, Paul, that's enough time. If you look at the clock, you see time is fleeting. This is not the time for a very long, expansive maneuver here. We have to go...
That's a good question, though.
Fine, answer it, and we'll go to the next one.
Well,
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
People like Toffler, who worship technology, would like to have it all seem inevitable, but that's to me, that's the same as saying alienation is inevitable. And we know that the species Homo, in different forms, was around for a couple of million years before civilization, in a somewhat almost unchanging lifestyle. But since since civilization and since division of labor and a lot of other things, that there's been this rapid, more than rapid, sort of stampede into more and more estranged forms of activity and organization. So, when you look at the 10,000 years since agriculture and compare it with the 2 million or so, and by the way, speaking again of recent findings, there's a guy named Thomas Wynn at the University of Colorado Anthropology Department who has argued very forcefully in the literature that the species had an intelligence equal to us modern humans today, at least 1 million years ago.
All right, I want to try to fit in 2 more people before 2 o'clock, so everybody go quickly. Sarah, you're calling from Philadelphia. Go ahead.
Hi, I was wondering if Mr. ZERZAN had read a book called Mutant Message Down Under.
Oh, yes, I have.
Oh, well, I wanted to talk a little about it, perhaps for the listeners.
Enjoyed that book a lot. Whether it's fiction or not, I got a lot out of that.
What is it, Sarah?
It's called Mutant Message Down Under. It's published as fiction, and it's been on the bestseller list, but it is, in fact, the author says it's fact. I do believe it is. It's about her, an American woman doctor, age 50, who is invited on a walkabout with an Aborigine tribe who seems to be living the sort of idealistic, primitive life that Mr. ZERZAN was talking about. It's a very exciting and wonderful book. The story of a courageous woman who walked with the Aboriginals and learned the wonderful secrets and wisdom of an old tribe. Things we all need to learn in our modern society to get back in touch with nature.
What is the author's name?
Her name is Marlo Morgan.
Marlo Morgan. All right, thank you very much.
All right, goodbye.
I enjoyed that book a lot.
Okay, I want to fit in Kevin calling from Pennsylvania. Kevin, this is Jay Diamond. You're on with John ZERZAN.
Hello, Jay. Thanks for letting me through here. I just have one comment. I missed a lot of the end of this conversation, but from what I heard driving home from work, it sounds to me like anarchy is like life without civilization, and I just feel that the human race is uncivilized enough as it is with our civilization. And that's all I had to say, Jay, and thank you very much.
All right. John, I would like to continue this with you in the very near future. I would like to continue. If you can do this again, I'll be in touch with you, because we had so many other people waiting on the line to speak to you now, and there are so many things I want to ask. And I have to apologize to the people that I rushed along in the last few minutes, but I'm pressured here because I look at the board, and there's all these people that held on, and I feel guilty, and I just want to move it along so that some other people could get on. Unfortunately, we didn't get everybody on. But John ZERZAN, thank you, and hopefully we'll be doing this again very, very soon. Good night.
Thank you.
This is America's most listened to talk radio station.
WABC.
It's 2 o'clock. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned for Curtis.
From ABC News, I'm Joe Vaughn. President Clinton is about to begin the serious and potentially troublesome part of his visit to Moscow, the face-to-face talks with President Boris Yeltsin to discuss such issues as Russia's pending sale of nuclear technology to Iran and the rough treatment of rebels in the breakaway province of Chechnya. There's renewed speculation that Yeltsin is ill. If this is true, who's in charge?
I think that the people who are in charge right now are behind the scenes. They're not so evident. A lot of people speak of the head of his bodyguards, Mr. Korzakov. That could be true, but I really think that it's more a group of politicians who are manipulating right now, and there's fighting going around in the Kremlin as to who is actually going to take over. I think it will probably be the Prime Minister, Chernomyrdin, at this point. I don't think the military can really play a role.
Russian television commentator Vladimir Posner, a guest on ABC's Nightline. Dave Wilson and his wife waited in the basement of their home in Cantrell, Illinois, while a tornado roared by over their heads.
The roof's gone. Our garage is totally destroyed. There's a great big huge tree laying there on its side, uprooted, right next to our house. It, I guess, could have just as easily have been the house, too. But it's pretty devastating.
Cantrell, 8 miles north of Springfield, was just one of several communities in central Illinois hammered by tornadoes during the day. In all, 1 or more tornadoes were reported in 6 counties. There were no reports of any serious injuries, with the high winds toppled several tractor-trailer rigs, blocking Interstate Route 55 for a while. Police in San Francisco say a man who walked onto the Golden Gate Bridge with a gun has been wounded in an exchange.